As the candidates prepare to take the stage, we welcome today's moderator, Deseret News editor, Doug Wilks. Grateful to have you here, Doug. Doug is a 35-year news veteran, and was named editor of the Deseret News in November of 2016. Prior to his appointment, he worked as managing editor of the news division, which includes the Deseret News, KSL TV, and radio, as well as their other digital platforms. Doug also serves on the Utah Debate Commission. He will introduce the candidates and ask questions on issues of specific interest to you, the leaders of our 249 cities and towns across the great state of Utah. Doug, thanks for joining us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I very much appreciate being here. It is nice to be in a room with a few people. I came in with a mask, but I can either wear my glasses and do a good job or wear my mask and not see anything. So with this social distancing, we'll try to move forward. I was grateful to accept the invitation of your executive director, Cameron Deal, to moderate this debate. And we'd like to bring the candidates to the stage. So first, Spencer Cox, representing the Republican Party, is the current lieutenant governor for Utah. And his Democratic opponent, Chris Peterson, currently a professor of law at the University of Utah's S.J. Quinney College of Law. Can you please welcome them both with a round of applause? So our format this morning is as follows. Each candidate will give a 1-minute opening statement. And following the opening statements, we will begin with questions in 4 or 5 probably different quadrants or categories. We've gone through the different categories. Sorry? 90-second opening statement. Okay. I was reading an old form. I apologize. 90-second opening statements. Then we'll go through different segments of 10 to 12 minutes each. The candidates will then we'll try and do a back and forth that I will moderate in each of those segments that are pertinent to the League of Cities and Towns. Toward the end of the hour, we will conclude with closing statements. I have 1 minute. Is it 90 seconds or a minute? 1 minute. Okay. There was a coin toss earlier this morning. Mr. Peterson won that coin toss and elected to finish with his closing statement. And Mr. Cox will open. So I'll refer to them as Lieutenant Governor and Professor for the remainder of this. And so, Lieutenant Governor, your statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here with you today. It's fun to see some actual people in a room. And to those online, thank you for joining us. I'm especially excited to be back at the League and Cities of Towns. I remember very distinctly as a young mayor, wondering what I had gotten myself into, and coming to my first League meeting and getting so much counsel, rubbing shoulders with incredible mayors across the state. And it's those relationships that I've enjoyed over the years. I was so grateful to have the endorsement of 150 mayors in the Republican primary, which is, I don't think has ever been done before. And as we visited all 248 cities and towns over the past year, I've had an opportunity to talk with you, to learn from you, and to talk to your citizens, and to see the great things that are happening here in our state. Now, 2020 is one for the books, and it's been a difficult year for all of us. Of course, this pandemic is overwhelming everything that we do and everything that we discuss, and I know it will be a topic today. On top of that, we've had earthquakes, we've had social unrest, and I told Governor Herbert, the good news is it can't get any worse. And a few days later, we had a hurricane of sorts, and it did get worse. So we're not going to say that ever again. But through it all, I've been so impressed with the people of this state. I've said often that the worst in times brings out the best of Utahns, and we've seen that. But most importantly, it's our local leaders that have carried the burden of responding to these tragedies. I've seen you respond with grace. I've seen you respond with true leadership, and it's been an honor to work closely with you. If I get the opportunity to serve over the next 4 years, we will continue those relationships in powerful ways, improving the economy of the state of Utah and the education of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Professor.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm excited to be visiting with the Utah League of Cities and Towns and with people all across the state that are interested in the future of our state. It's an honor to serve, and it's an honor to try to earn your vote. You know, my great-great-grandfather led a wagon train of 1,500 pioneers to the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. My family's been here for a long time. He went on to become the first public school superintendent, or one of the first public school superintendents in the Deseret territory. He was also the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I believe he was a Democrat for about 4 or 5 terms. And he also was the first chairman of Zions Bank and a leader in the LDS Church. I don't know where that Zions Bank money went, because I grew up with very limited income in a single parent household with a disabled mom in West Valley City. Got my first job when I was about 10 or 11 years old, picking up trash on the side of the road at a strip mall on 3500 South. For those of you that know the Salt Lake Valley, very busy street. And I worked my way through college. And early on, I decided that I wanted my life to be about lifting people up, making a difference in this world, trying to be a mentor and a public servant. Eventually won a scholarship to go to law school at the University of Utah, and moved on and worked for a judge, and then went back to Washington, D.C. Eventually, I came back to Utah to try to make my own home state a better place to live. And that's why I'm in this race, to try to serve you and improve the quality of life. There's a lot of great things we're doing, but we do have some challenges, and we need to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I appreciate that. We'd like to open with our first battery of questions focused on the pandemic, and we'll begin first, Lieutenant Governor, this directed to you. Utah is in the midst of record numbers of COVID-19 cases, the second time there's been a surge, following what appeared to be a good start with strong preventive measures in the spring. In addition to your role as Lieutenant Governor, you were named by Governor Gary Herbert to head the COVID-19 Community Task Force. Do you take responsibility as head of that task force for the current surge in Utah? And would you be doing something different if you were governor?
Well, thank you for that question. We are in the middle of a surge, and it's something that we're all very concerned about. The New York Times about 14 or 15 days ago did an interesting piece on these surges that are happening across the country and what is driving those surges. And what they found is that in almost every one of these, it's being driven by colleges going back. And of course, Utah County is at the center of this surge right now. We are seeing those record number of cases coming, driven largely by college-age students and a younger population. And that is true across the Midwest. It's true in the South. It's true in red states. It's true in blue states. And it's something we're very concerned about. And of course, over the past week, you've heard Governor Herbert make announcements together with county commissioners, local government officials in Utah County about things that they are doing that we can do collectively to help slow down that surge. It's important to note that as these surges continue, while it's good news that it is a younger population, we know statistically that younger people are far less likely to end up in the hospital or to lose their lives from this pandemic. If we were able to contain it to that small group of people, we would certainly do that. The bad news is that we know that inevitably young people end up interacting with older people, and this spreads. And of course, we're starting to see hospitalizations tick up. And so we all have responsibility for stopping the spread of this virus. Absolutely, government plays a role in that and is helping to lead the task force that was active early on. We now have a unified command, which reports directly to the lieutenant governor and to the governor. We work very closely with medical experts across the state, of course, with local government officials, and are putting in place everything that we can to help reduce the spread in Utah County right now, make sure that we don't spread it to other areas, and that we keep the health and safety of Utahns paramount. But we also have to focus on that economic piece. It's one of the things that Utah has done very well in response, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about that when we have more time than 2 minutes.
Professor, your response?
This is a very dangerous disease. 200,000 Americans have now perished. That's more people than died, more Americans than died in the First World War, and more Americans that died in every combat operation, including since the Second World War, including the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, and all the Middle Eastern wars combined. It's now killed more people in the state of Utah than all of our traffic fatalities. And it's not just the deaths. It's also long-term permanent scarring of the lungs, kidney disease, heart disease, and even brain damage. And many people are still long haulers, so-called, that are not getting over the virus. It's continuing to infect them. We need to do more to keep our public safe. Here is my plan. First, we need to immediately transition to a statewide mask mandate. I respect and want to work in partnership with local governments, but the problem is we're seeding different infections from one community to another. The virus is across our entire state, not just in one location. Second, we need to decrease the testing times for processing tests to no more than 24 hours. People need to know whether or not they can go back to work or to school immediately, or whether or not they're going to put their coworkers and friends and family at risk. Third, we've got to increase the number of contact tracers, triple or even quadruple the number of contact tracers. So when this next surge comes down, we can start to keep track of who's got the disease, get them safely and humanely quarantined and out of circulation, so we're not continuing to see another additional surges down the road. And then fourth, we've got to get the best available technology and resources. 7 months into the pandemic, people still can't get the highest quality protection, N95 masks that all the physicians say are the best resources to keep them safe. Our frontline teachers, meat packers, bus drivers, they need to be able to have safety so they can return to work and that people can thrive economically. Also, we've invested in a bunch of cell phone apps that didn't work, and we're closing low-income health clinics that would be really useful to try to keep this virus at bay. We need to do better.
Let me go to that and give you a chance to respond, Lieutenant Governor. You said earlier this week, I'm still the Lieutenant Governor and I have no choice but to agree with the actions of the governor. A day later, the governor said, certainly he is free to differ from me, speaking of you, but what he is doing is following the science that is coming from our unified command. Given the governor's response that you're free to differ with him, can you now speak for yourself and tell us exactly how you feel about a mask mandate?
Well, Doug, I feel bad that you didn't listen to the entire interview where those statements were come up. And let me just say this, the media loves nothing more than to draw a lieutenant governor and a governor apart from each other. That is not helpful. It's not good during a pandemic. We have one governor in this state, and I support the governor. I support the governor in the decisions that he makes. We have differences of opinion, and we've had differences of opinion for the last 7 years. He will be the first person to tell you that. If you listen to the whole response, that first part was clearly a joke, and everyone was laughing at that. The second part in what I said was, I support the governor in his decision on the statewide mask mandate. We have differences across the state. Our two biggest counties are under a statewide mask mandate right now. In Sanpete County, where I live, we've been social distancing for 160 years. It's kind of how we do things. We live in very different parts of the state, and this virus is having bigger impacts in certain areas right now. And this is important. If you implement a mask mandate and you don't have local support and local buy-in, guess how successful that mask mandate or any mandate is going to be. I applaud the governor for his willingness to reach out to local officials, to work very closely with local officials. Local government is closest to the people, and it's important that the people listen to their local leaders, because that's what, there's so much trust there. There's so much understanding of those unique circumstances. And so it's incredibly valuable that we work closely with our local leaders to make those decisions, which is exactly what we have done since the very beginning of this pandemic.
Professor Peterson, Utah does have one of the lowest death rates in the nation. That's 0.7%, 14 people per 100,000. Utah's doing very well. It's also among the most resilient economies during the pandemic, with an unemployment rate that recovered very quickly, much less. Could you really do better if you were governor?
Yes, it could. Look, the reason we have lower death rates is because we have a relatively young population, and because we're a relatively healthy people, and good for us. I'm proud of that. We tend to be a little bit more fit than some other areas of the country, and that's something we could be proud of. But it's not because of the policy at the state level. The simple fact is that the best available protection that we have in this crisis is putting on a mask, and hopefully putting on one that actually does a really good job filtering out the disease. And I know that it's hard to wear them. A lot of people are suspicious about them. We had some failed leadership at the federal level where the president of the United States said that it was a hoax and that it was just going to go away and it would even disappear, and it's not. The simple fact is that we are in a natural disaster, just like a fire or a flood, only you can't see it because it's a virus. Part of the problem is we keep putting holes in the bucket that we need to keep the virus in. If we don't all work together as a team and follow the best available people scientific recommendations to try to keep people safe, then we're going to have more people who are getting sick and dying. Is it going to be as many people as in Mississippi? I don't know, probably not. But what about that person that does die, that grandfather, that grandpa, or that grandma? You know, we have teachers right now who are in the critical, intensive care, fighting for their lives with the tube down their throat. We have to lead. And for those that don't believe in science, I'm sorry, but we have to try to do everything that we can to take care of one another. That's what loving your neighbors is about. That's what coming together in a time of crisis requires. The first obligation of leadership is to take every action you can to keep the public safe. That's what I'll do. That's what I'm going to do.
Let's just do one more on this, and that's tying it to the local governments. Lieutenant Governor, can you talk about your leadership style as it relates to the states working with the local governments through a pandemic? What you've done, what you'd like to do as governor, how you would work with this group.
Sure. Thank you, Doug. And again, these are my people, and this is my background. I was a city councilman, a mayor, and a county commissioner. The lessons I learned through those experiences govern everything that I've done as lieutenant governor, and will continue to help me in everything that I will do as governor of this great state. We have amazing local leadership in our state, and that's how you reach people. It's those contacts and making sure that we are working arm in arm closely. Throughout this pandemic, we've kept very close relationships with the League of Cities and Towns, as well the Utah Association of Counties, and that's of absolute importance. And we'll continue, not just for pandemic issues, but for every issue that we're facing. I want to go back to just a couple things that were said. I think it's important when we do these debates, we actually agree on a lot of things, and there's a couple things that Professor Peterson mentioned that are really important. We do need to decrease testing times. That's absolutely imperative. We control the state lab. We've reduced testing times in that lab to 24 hours. By the middle of next month, that will be down to 18 hours. Unfortunately, a lot of this testing happens in other labs. Just had another meeting yesterday with IHC, the University of Utah, and others about new things that we can do to reduce those wait times. We also need more contact tracers. We have given local health departments millions of dollars to increase contact tracing. They're hiring contact tracers as fast as they can. They're getting them up to speed and making that happen. On the issue though of N95 masks, we do have N95 masks available. We have a supply chain issue that started in March. We've done a great job of overcoming those supply chain issues and making a difference. But the last thing I want to say is this: when the governor and I first started pushing people to wear masks, it was the scientific community that told us not to do it. They told us it was a mistake. They told us we should not be doing it, and we did it anyway. We have been pushing mask wearing. He's absolutely right. Everyone should wear a mask. You should care about your neighbors. We should be doing that. Right now, mask usage in the state is up to 80% and climbing, and we're so grateful for people that are doing that.
Professor, local government and how you would work as governor with local government?
Well, first off, I want to draw a distinction with some of the things that I've said about the coronavirus crisis, a public health emergency. That's not the same sort of approach that we need to have for ordinary day-to-day life with our other important issues. We're going to get through this coronavirus crisis together, and then we're going to have to take on the normal challenges that we face. You know, I actually feel like the League of Cities and Towns is also my people too. You know, my mom, who I mentioned earlier, who is disabled, she has multiple sclerosis. And when I was about a teenager, one of the things about that disease, it's funny, sometimes it becomes degenerative and other times it goes into remission. And she had a renaissance in her life and started volunteering in the handicapped parking enforcement division, and then on the planning commission of West Valley City, and eventually ran for city councilwoman. And she was came back and had this renaissance when she became a city councilwoman in West Valley City for nearly 20 years. And I remember helping her on her campaigns and seeing what she did for that community and how she gave back to them. And that has given me a deep respect for local government. And I want you all to know, the leaders of our cities and towns, as well as our counties across the state, that I will respect you and work as a team and try to listen to the approach that you would prefer. And generally speaking, the right thing to do is to defer to people at the local level because they're closest to their constituents. That's the approach that I'm going to take. And I'm going to take that approach for Hurricane, for Washington County and St. George, and also for Salt Lake City, which sometimes sometimes, honestly, in recent years has been pushed around a little bit by our state legislature. I think that what we need in this state is to have a new renaissance of bipartisanship and working together in community spirit, as we have had in the past. It's been a long time since we've had a Democratic governor, but we did have some great ones. Scott Matheson Sr., some of you will remember. Cal Rampton was a great governor. And back in the crisis of the Great Depression, we had a whole string of wonderful Democratic governors. I'm a reasonable moderate, fiscally prudent, evidence-oriented, and teamwork focused. I hope that you'll give me a chance to lead in this state.
Thank you. Let's move on. We took a little longer with that segment, but obviously the pandemic is key. I'd like now to discuss the challenges around racial equity and community trust in law enforcement. And as we begin this, we'll give the first question then to Professor Peterson. First, do you believe there is institutional racism? And if so, where do you see it? And if elected governor, what will you do about it?
Well, in the United States of America, we do have an institutional racism problem. Slavery was the original sin of our country, and we still struggle to this day to try and find peace and understand one another in our racial relations. And right now, we're really struggling because there are a lot of hurt feelings on both sides. The first thing I'd like to say is to let everybody know that's Black or a person of color or Indigenous that I see you and I care about you. I love you. You're my neighbors. You're my friends. And I want to live together in harmony and give you all the opportunities that I can to help you succeed in this world. You are a full-fledged participant in our society. I celebrate our diversity. I also want to let folks in law enforcement know who I think right now are feeling, some of them are feeling demoralized and underappreciated. I also see you and I respect your service and your commitment to the safety of our communities. Together, we've got to find a path where we can compromise and make progress. Some of the things that I think that we should take on in terms of police reform is making sure that our police officers have all the mental health and counseling resources they need. I've talked to cops around the state, and one of the things I learned was that after they do terrible crime scene investigations, oftentimes they don't have someone to talk to work out some of the anger and grief issues that come with, things like investigating the crime scene of a murder-suicide. I also think that we should try to find new ways to have conflict de-escalation, to work with police departments, sheriff's departments, and also the highway patrol to make sure that our policies and also our training at the state level are as good as we can make them in terms of implicit bias training and conflict de-escalation. And I also want to mention, there's a lot of rumors going around that some people in the Democratic Party want to defund the police. That's not so. I haven't met a single Democratic politician in this state that supports that, and I certainly do not. What I want is to improve our policing, professionalism, so they can serve with equal justice under the law, with bright eyes and an open heart, to try to make us the best, more perfect union that we all aspire to be.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question, Lieutenant Governor. Do you believe there's institutional racism? And if so, where do you see it? And elected governor, what will you do to address it?
So far too often in this discussion and so many, we're presented with false choices. We have to choose between our police and our multicultural communities. And I just simply reject that. We are so fortunate here in the state of Utah to have incredible men and women involved in law enforcement. And over the past several months, I've had an opportunity to sit down with them, to talk to them, to understand what is happening there, and to hear their views and their experiences and their excitement at the opportunity to implement some of these changes that we're talking about. And I've had an opportunity to sit down with our multicultural communities and talk about their real experiences, experiences that are incredibly troubling as they try to navigate this world. And as we've had these conversations, I've said to them, I will never know what it is like to be a Black man or a Hispanic man in Utah. I can't have that experience. But what I can do is I can get proximate, I can get close, and I can learn from those people who are having these experiences. And here's what we're finding. There are challenges that need to be addressed for sure. One of them is specifically in education. I feel so strongly about this. We have a problem in equity when it comes to education. I think all of us, Republicans and Democrats, absolutely believe that we should we want to give people we want to teach people to fish, not give them a fish. We say that all the time, and we believe that. And yet, when we're teaching people how to fish, if you live in wealthy neighborhoods or on the east side, you get a tremendous amount more funding per student in those school districts than we do on the west side or in rural Utah. That's something that has to change. There are other things that we are working on right now. I'm very proud that several years ago, I led the Governor's Suicide Prevention Task Force. We launched mobile crisis outreach teams. Instead of dialing 911 and getting a police officer and a fire engine and an ambulance to come when somebody is having a mental health crisis, we send actual mental health professionals who can make a huge difference. And we've got about 19 other things we're working on right now to solve that issue.
Let's stay with policy issues for a minute. Professor, as it relates to law enforcement, should there be policy issues from the state level coming down throughout the state?
Well, I talked about a couple. You know, the state does some police officer standards and trainings, and the state can be helpful in trying to support local police departments and sheriff's offices to give them the resources they need, can help them work on their policies and procedures, their training. I also think it's a good idea. There are some police officers, I think it's relatively small, that, you know, maybe you're too violent and are not following the rules. We've seen that from time to time, and if we find that, then look, they need to find a different job, and the state can be useful in sharing information about that. And I also think that the state has a role in working with the state legislature to think through what some of the laws and policies are of our state. So there definitely is a role to play. We also, you know, the highway patrol is, of course, supervised by the state level. So there's a lot of work to be done at the state to try to keep continually making our law enforcement the best it can possibly be. And what you can expect from me will be respect for our citizens and our communities, to try to make sure that they're policed professionally, and also respect for law enforcement, appreciating the hard work and the difficult job that they have, to try to give them the resources that they need to be as safe as they can be, and survive and go forward in the best way possible.
Lieutenant Governor, as this policies in law enforcement, is there a state standard you can promote, or what are your policies?
Sure. Yeah, the state does play a role, and as Professor Peterson mentioned, the post is a major piece of that. This is where law enforcement officers get trained for their jobs and get their start. And I hope everybody saw that last week that Post actually announced some major changes to their training to help address some of these issues, making sure that we have more resources, more hours, more training time on some of these de-escalation tactics that are so critical, helping make sure that there is a connection with our multicultural communities, training on implicit bias and those issues that unfortunately are tearing our nation apart right now. And so there's a role to be played there. I also serve and have for the past 7 years as the co-chair of the Governor's Multicultural Commission. And through our Multicultural Commission, we've actually been working very closely with the Martin Luther King Commission. The governor and I have had several meetings with them, as well as Jess Anderson, who is the Commissioner of Public Safety here in the state, and works with all of our chiefs of police in every city and town, as well as our county sheriffs. And the collaboration that is happening here really is a model to the nation. Unfortunately, when these things happen in other states, of course, they get national attention, and we feel that pressure here at home. And that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because it allows us to work closely together. But we have leaders from the Black community, we have leaders from the Hispanic community, we have leaders from our Native American community and our Pacific Islander community, working shoulder to shoulder with our chiefs of police and others, like Chief Ross, who's here in the room right now. And they're coming up with real solutions and making a tremendous difference. And so I actually believe that this is a positive time for our state, that we will come out of this in a much better place than we were before, because we are working collaboratively together as an example to the rest of the nation.
I'd like to give you each one more minute on this. Professor Peterson, what can you kind of crystallize, what does Utah need to do to bridge this racial divide that exists?
Well, the next thing I'd like to talk about, since we have the time, is building economic opportunity. And
Well, can we
equality.
stick with this and we'll get to
That's what I'm trying to do. Bridge the racial divide, right? That's the
Okay.
question. Yeah, so the way that one of the things that I think we need to do to bridge the racial divide is to make sure that we're spreading wealth and opportunities across all of our communities. You know, here in the state, we've had a relatively low unemployment rate. That's something we can be proud of. But part of what's causing tension in our communities is that so many people have jobs, not careers. They're $10 an hour jobs, some of them even $7.25 an hour. It's harder to believe in our society when you feel like you're being left behind. We also have one of the lower health insurance coverage rates in the country. That breeds tension and resentment. Last thing I'll mention, the good people of Utah passed a ballot measure to try to create fair legislative redistricting, only to see that ballot measure watered down. And that also creates resentment too. The minority communities in our state are disproportionately put in legislative districts where their vote literally does count for less because they have less representation in the state legislature. Those kind of policies need to be addressed on a systematic basis to try to decrease racial tension in our society.
Lieutenant Governor, and you've got about a minute 10.
Thank you. So yeah, we do need to reach out to our multicultural communities and make sure that they have every opportunity. One of the things that makes Utah unique, and something we should all be very proud of, is that we lead the nation in upward mobility. That means you can be born in poverty and not end up in poverty. And that's a really big deal. We used to call that the American dream. Several publications, Harvard and others, have done studies that said that the American dream is dying, except for Utah. But we have to be vigilant. We have to make sure that we are doing everything possible. One quick example, during this pandemic, of course, Congress came out with loans for businesses that are struggling to keep their doors open and to keep their employees in business. We call them PPP loans. Utah led the nation in getting those loans out to businesses. We were number one. That's why one of the reasons our economy is doing so well, leading the nation right now. Unfortunately, when we looked at that data, we realized that many of our multicultural businesses, minority-owned businesses, did not take advantage of those PPP loans. So when the second tranche came available, we focused, working with Zions Bank and others, on those people. And this time we were able to get those businesses connected. We've learned some valuable lessons, and we have to continue that.
Let's move on to talk about growth, a big issue in Utah and certainly for the next 30 years. Survey data from the League of Cities and Towns shows that 63% of Utahns in Utah's 10 most populated counties said they believed Utah was growing too quickly. As governor, how would you work with local communities to manage growth and the impacts on the quality of life? And this certainly speaks to the differences between the very rural versus urban communities. And we'll start with Professor Peterson.
Well, one of the realities that we've got to get used to is that our population is growing. We have a lot of kids in our state. It's something I'm proud of and I like. But our population is growing both because people are growing up and also because we have more and more people moving in. And as we look across our valleys, we got to expect that there's going to be millions more people over the coming decades coming in, putting further strain on some of our resources, further challenges with respect to our air pollution challenges. And we've got to get ready. So what can we do? First, we need to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure to prepare ourselves for that growth, to make sure that we've got the infrastructure in place that where our businesses can thrive, where we can build and develop good, affordable housing so people have places to live. Some of the ways that I think we should approach that, we need to try to create lively, livable, walking-friendly communities. And that's going to be, it's going to require a partnership between local governments and the state government to have good planning practices to make sure we're ready for these new people coming in. Second, I hope at some point we'll have a chance to talk about our challenges with air pollution and water, because as more and more people coming in, it's going to put further strain on our already stretched resources. So we've got to have the infrastructure in place and start getting ready to transition to cleaner technologies. So that's second. And then third, we've got to try to make sure that our political system and our social system is ready to handle the changes that are coming our way. And that means having a diverse, bipartisan society society that's open to some changes and some evolution in the coming years. I believe that is a breath of fresh air on that concern, because we need a little bit of change. We've had one party rule in our state for a long time, and it's not such a bad idea as we get ready to tackle the challenges of the future, to be ready with a little bit more agility and have more people feel like they're being represented inside our political system.
Lieutenant Governor?
Thank you. We have been the fastest growing state over the past 10 years. As Professor Peterson mentioned, we're really good at having kids here, and we almost always lead the nation in birth rate. Although it may surprise people to find out that last year we were actually fourth and below replacement rate for the first time in anyone's memory. But the people that are moving here, that's the big driver of this population growth. We've been top 10 now for in-migration. People have discovered Utah. Of course, we live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and that's bringing people here in record numbers. But it's because of our economic success that people want to come here. They're fleeing places like California, where left-leaning politicians are basically destroying their economy and driving people away. But we have to be very careful in the way that we grow here. Density has become a four-letter word for many people, but that's only because, and I share this far too often, but it's so critical that we remember that when infrastructure precedes density, the quality of life stays high. But where density precedes infrastructure, we see the quality of life start to decline. And no one wants that to happen here in the state of Utah. So as a state, our role is to be laser focused on infrastructure, making sure that we have the transportation infrastructure, the water infrastructure, all of those things that are needed to handle that type of growth. Most importantly, though, it is not the state's job to tell local municipalities how to grow. That's not what we do. That is left up to mayors and city council members who are closest to the people. But we have to provide those resources. And one resource we don't talk enough about are planning. When this expansion happens, those shoulder communities are seeing record growth, but they don't have the resources for planning capabilities. The state has a role to play in helping them. And then we have to help rural Utah, who's not taking advantage of the incredible prosperity that we're having in our state. And we can move some of that growth out into other areas.
Professor, let's do a minute for each of these responses. Do we have enough water? Technology companies require a lot of water. How do we get the water in Utah to manage the growth?
Look, we have real challenges with water. We also, if we're looking down the future at the demographic trends, we also need to start to talk about the potential challenges out there with respect to climate change. I've seen some pretty scary predictions from very smart scientists about what could potentially be happening to our snowpack in the coming years. I've seen projections where in 40 years, we could be looking at an 80% reduction in our total snowpack with the changing climate. That's a serious concern, because 80% of our water currently goes to agriculture, and that's a critical and important part of our economy. If we also have a significant increase in the population, we're going to have to be very careful about conservation, and we're going to have to manage that. And so I'll be focused on trying to build conservation, improve our infrastructure to get our water resources available.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. Technology companies don't require a lot of water. Data centers require a lot of water. And I think it's crazy that we're incentivizing giving away tax dollars for big data centers, but that's another story for another day. What is important here is that we continue to look forward. One of the problems with government traditionally is that politicians only look 4 years or 2 years or 6 years down the road. We've done a much better job here in the state of Utah. We have water districts with some of the brightest people I know working on these issues every day and planning not just 2 years or 5 years or 10 years ahead, but planning 50 years ahead or greater. We have so much success here, and I think it's critical to look back. We often take credit for that success and for good reason. But it's the decisions that were made 100 years ago, 150 years ago that have made it possible for us to have these successes today. And so we have to be willing to invest in water projects. We have to focus on conservation and absolutely using the technology that's available for conservation. We can do much better as a state in conserving water, but we have to build out those major projects like the Lake Powell Pipeline.
Let me go to a jobs question, and I'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor, and give Professor Peterson the word on this, the final word on jobs. Utah's diverse energy industry plays a significant role, obviously, as you both know, in the state's economy. It encompasses traditional fossil fuels and renewable resources, The mining sector produces crude oil, natural gas, and coal. Power producers generate electricity from hydropower, geothermal, solar, wind, and biomass. The Kempsey-Gardner Policy Institute reported noted in 2007 that the energy industry directly and indirectly supports 3.8% of the state's employment, 4.2% of its earnings, and 5.7% of its gross domestic product. So what would you do, Lieutenant Governor, to help the energy industry and save jobs in this area of the state?
Yeah, so I live in coal country. Born and raised in Sanpete County, right bordering Carbon and Emery counties. Most of my friends' dads growing up worked in coal mines and worked in the power plants. And we built this state on their backs. Cheap energy is one of the biggest drivers in our economic development and continues to play an important role today. And we know that technology advances are happening. They're happening all of the time. And those are good things. Those are positive things. There are things that lead to new technologies, new jobs, lead to better air quality. And by the way, we've improved our air quality along the Wasatch Front 30% over the last 10 years, something most people thought could not happen. But at the same time, we cannot forget those people. There will be a time as we continue to transition away from fossil fuels that those jobs, and some of that is already happening now, but we can't abandon them. We can't forget about them. We need to continue to focus on those jobs in rural Utah. We have the cleanest coal in the country right here in the nation, in the world, right here in the state of Utah. And as long as there are coal-fired plants burning anywhere in this nation and in this world, they should be burning Utah coal. It's cleaner than the dirty coal that comes out of many other places like India and China. We can do a better job of that, and we've got to take care of those employees in those rural areas.
Yeah, about 1:15 for this response, Professor Peterson.
So first off, the question is about jobs in the energy industry. First off, I'm very proud to have been endorsed by the Mine Workers of America because I believe in trying to fight for our ordinary working people across the state. It's important that our jobs are not just jobs, but they're careers that you can build a family around. And I also recognize that there's a role to play for our fossil fuel industry. We need to start transitioning away from that, but we also need to recognize that those jobs need to be replaced by other new, better jobs. And I'm focused on making sure that happens. We need more commercial solar power plants. We need to have rooftop solar here in the Salt Lake and along in the Wasatch Front, both residential and businesses, and also in our government buildings. Wouldn't it be great if we had solar panels across all the top of our public schools across the state? I also think we need more wind energy, and we need to make sure that we're tapping. Did you know that we have the third highest untapped geothermal energy reserves in the state? Geothermal energy is very efficient and clean because it's there whether the rain is or the rain or the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. You use energy from the core of the earth to heat boilers. It's a very effective way to do it, and we have some of those reserves available near Carbon County. I think we should be using our infrastructure dollars and bonding to try to facilitate those clean energy projects across the state.
Thank you. We're going to move into a discussion on housing and economic development, but to get there, you both mentioned infrastructure. So we'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor. How do you intend to fund transportation infrastructure in light of the shrinking motor fuel tax revenues and a shift to work from home? Where will that money come from?
Well, it's a really interesting question. And of course, we are currently right now, our Department of Transportation is working on different models, different ideas on how exactly to do that. Whether that's some sort of mileage-based tax instead of a fuel tax, that's in an experimental phase right now, and we'll have more information as that comes forward. But the good news is, and I've been pushing this, we haven't talked about it yet, but this idea of working from home, while it does lower the amount of taxes available from motor fuel taxes, it actually, we don't need wider roads or more roads when more and more people are working from home. There are very few silver linings coming out of this pandemic, but this is certainly one. About a year and a half ago, I asked the governor to let me do an experiment and to take 130 employees and have them work from home voluntarily 3 to 5 days a week. And in so doing, we measured everything they did for 6 months, and it was really incredible. But importantly, of course, they drove less. We measured every mile they drove. We measured the pollution that came out of their cars, and there was a significant reduction in pollution and miles driven, which is good for our roads. It's good for the tax base, and it's good for people. Turns out just as an aside, their mental health actually improved over their colleagues. Their productivity went up 20%. We're going to save millions of dollars by not building as many buildings, state tax dollars that we would have had to do otherwise. And the best part is now people in rural Utah can apply for these jobs with broadband access. And that's a huge win for our state. And so I actually think that a transition to work from home, by the way, at the end of the year, we were supposed to have 2,500 employees working from home in state government. We now have far more than that. And that's going to continue in a big way. That's going to reduce the pressure for infrastructure, transportation infrastructure moving forward.
Thank you. Professor Peterson, how would you fund transportation infrastructure?
So first off, I actually agree with Lieutenant Governor Cox about the importance of teleworking. I think that's a great idea. I support that. One of the things that I think we need to do to try to facilitate that, we've got to invest in rural broadband, which I realize is not directly responsive to transportation, except that it decreases the overall transportation needs of the state. You know, Maine just a couple weeks back approved a statewide ballot measure to issue bonds to help fund their rural broadband initiative. Utah should be doing the same thing, taking advantage of rock bottom interest rates to get rural broadband out across the state. That'll decrease some of our transportation needs. And second, I think that, you know, we're going to have to continue, as we grow, we're going to have to continue to build and maintain our road system. That's important. But as we go forward, especially as we become more dense along the Wasatch Front, we need to shift the dial a bit more towards mass transit. And how are we going to fund that? Through the same sort of ways that we are now. Declining gas revenue needs to be replaced by other sources of revenue. One of the concerns I have about taxation, hopefully we'll get back to that at some point. If you look at all of the different types of taxes and fees that we have across our state, whether that's income taxes, property taxes, use fees, and sales taxes, now today we have a regressive tax system in our state where low to moderate income people actually have to pay a disproportionate share of their overall income and wealth in comparison to the very most wealthy people in our state. That's backwards. And what we need to do is to try to return to a more progressive tax structure. The challenge is that, with a one-party system, so many of the incremental tax decisions are being made based on special interests and party insiders and lobbyists behind the scenes. And as each incremental decision is getting made, that's shifting more and more tax burden away from those who are well represented in the state legislature to those who are not. That's why we need somebody who's an advocate for the workers, for the public, for the consumers in our state to push back on that a bit and make sure we've got the revenue available for things like transportation infrastructure.
Lieutenant Governor, let me give you a 1-minute chance to talk about a tax structure, your vision for a tax structure in Utah.
Sure. So I also want to respond. I'm grateful that Professor Peterson has talked about rural broadband and the importance of that. And there's nobody better situated to lead the state in rural broadband. For 10 years, I helped run a rural broadband company delivering fiber optic infrastructure across rural Utah. We have major, not my company, but other companies are doing major fiber projects right now in San Juan County and Daggett County, our two most remote counties, and that will make a tremendous difference. On the tax side, this has been a big discussion. Of course, we actually have a ballot measure that will change the way that we fund education in this state, and it's critical. The food tax is a regressive tax, and that's why I didn't support. That's why my Senator Henderson, my running mate, voted against increasing the food tax here in the state of Utah. That's not how we should do taxation. We have a very solid tax structure right now. It's one of the reasons that our economy is doing so well. And again, we're leading the nation in upward mobility.
Professor, I'll give you 1 more minute to talk about taxes or respond to anything that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I agree that your experience running a telecommunication company is great. I really admire that. That's wonderful. But the simple fact, though, is that there are a bunch of our counties across the state that don't even not have broadband. A majority of residents don't have any internet at all. And the simple fact is that the one-party system of government in the state hasn't been getting the job done. If we were really leading, then we wouldn't be behind Maine, which has already issued bonds to try to accomplish this. So look, we just need leadership to get it done. Second, you mentioned the food taxes. I I opposed that food tax, it's exactly what I talked about, that we're looking for revenue in the state. And so the majority party decides, where are we going to get that? Well, one stable source of revenue is everybody has to eat. So let's tax that. I would never have approved that. I wouldn't have supported it. And I would have done everything I could to stop it. I'm glad that you didn't support it, but you also didn't succeed in preventing it from happening. It's Harmons and the good people of Utah who rose up and said no to that regressive tax. I swear that I will never support a food tax if I'm elected your governor.
Okay. We're nearing the end of our hour, but we have a few more minutes. Let me go again, dealing with economic development. The pandemic has sort of recalibrated everything, and I want to focus in on the 600-acre prison site. So we'll start with you, Professor. Do we need to rethink what should go into that site when we move the prison? Should it be a business center? Should it be a park? Should it be something else? If we're not on the roads, if we're working from home, what's your vision for that spot?
Well, first off, I think that the governor has to have a relatively light hand in trying to control one particular residential or one particular development. I mean, the local governments are going to need to take the lead on that. But what I will say is that, as that land gets sold off, the thing that you can be confident from me is that I will be carefully watching to make sure that all of the transactions are transparent, that they are fair, that no one's taking undue advantage of the taxpayer, and that we're moving forward in a way that is responsible economically for the state. That's going to be the primary role of the government, but of the governor. But to the extent that folks are interested in my perspective, I think that we should be trying to have a mixed-use community that connects to some of the wonderful trails down there, and it has both businesses and also a living, a vibrant urban community to try to decrease some of the traffic that's flowing throughout the I-15 corridor.
Mm-hmm. Lieutenant Governor, about a minute for this response.
Yeah, thank you. I've been very fortunate to serve as the co-chair of the Point of the Mountain Authority Board, and that is the group that is making all of the decisions about what will be located there and how that land will be developed. The 700 acres where the current prison sits, and we do have representation on that board from local mayors. The Draper mayor, the mayor of South Jordan, who's here today, also sits on that board, and it's really incredible. This is a once, not just in a generation, but a once in the history of our state opportunity. There are likely only maybe one or two other opportunities like this anywhere in the world. And my biggest concern is that we will dream too small on this one. And so we are reaching out. We have some of the best thinkers in the world working on this project. And what's interesting is it's not just to be sold off to developers. In statute, there is, for example, a higher education component that will allow us to use this as a technology innovation hub. It will be a place where you can live and work. And my proposal, and the proposal actually of one of the local mayors, is that this become the first carless development in the state of Utah. Again, utilizing mass transit and the other infrastructure that sits right in the middle of this incredible corridor, an opportunity to show the rest of the world that there's a better way to develop, a better way to live and play and work in the same area.
Okay. We don't have much time, but I want to give you each a chance to give us a 1-minute response for how you will solve affordable housing in Utah for the next 50 years. Can you do that in 60 seconds? But let's go with you, Lieutenant Governor, and then we'll switch back over to the professor, and then we'll set up for closing statements. I guess it speaks to what can you do from the governor's chair to impact affordable housing?
Chris, I'd be happy to let you go first.
No. You're my guest.
Thank you. I'm just trying to be generous here. In 1 minute, how we solve affordable housing for the next 50 years. Look, this is something that will require all of us to work on. It's going to require unity between local government and state government. Again, local government makes the decisions about how to develop their areas, but we have infrastructure in places, and it's okay to have density, for example, around transit hubs. That makes sense, and that doesn't lower the quality of life. There is a role for the state to play. There's a funding role for the state to play, and we are playing that now. We had a big piece of legislation passed actually the last 2 years dealing specifically with this issue. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus and what it's doing to budgets, we didn't get all of the money that we had hoped for the affordable housing piece, but that doesn't mean that we stop. We have to continue. Again, if we want everybody to participate in economic prosperity, we have to make sure that they can afford to live here. We can't just push everyone out. Exactly what has happened in California. We can't turn the Wasatch Front into California, and we won't do that if we elect good Republicans.
Professor?
Well, thank you so much. So first off, part of the challenge with affordable housing is that more and more people aren't keeping up in terms of their income. We have a $7.25 minimum wage in this state, and there's no way that you can afford housing with a low level employment like that. So we've got to make sure that we're training people to have the jobs of the future and develop real careers. I also want to put a plug in for revisiting the role of organized labor and unions in our society. Across the world, if you look at states or countries that have active organized labor, generally speaking, there's more shared prosperity and more access to things like healthcare, which we haven't had a time to talk about today and is one of my highest priorities, and also affordable housing. Second, I think that we need to have incentives to make sure that as we do development, we're making sure that there are affordable units that are built in organically into those communities. Third, I think that we need to work in partnership with, the state needs to work in partnership with local governments to do what we can to try to create livable, vibrant, walking communities where people can have access to affordable housing close to where they live.
Thank you. We'll now move into our closing statements. The coin toss reflected that Lieutenant Governor Cox will go first, and then we'll give Professor Chris Peterson the final word.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you for allowing us to do this. I hope you realize that how it is actually possible to have dignified discourse between two opponents who disagree on some things and agree on some things, and that we don't have to hate each other. Public discourse and political discourse in our nation has become incredibly divisive right now, more toxic than ever before. I believe that that is the biggest problem facing our state and facing our country right now. We will never be able to solve any of the problems we talked about today if we hate each other, if we view politics as religion, and if it is our religion, then we think anybody who disagrees with us is evil. That is not true. We must make room for legitimate discourse in our state. We have an opportunity to show the rest of the nation that there is a better way to do things. And I hope what you've seen today is that can actually happen. My promise to you as voters is that I will never use fear and divisiveness to try to gain political power or to tear our state apart. On the contrary, I will listen. I will work closely with everyone, regardless of your situation, regardless of your political stances. And if elected, I will work closely with Professor Peterson on many of his initiatives. And if he's elected, I hope we can still continue to work together to make Utah a better place.
Thank you, Professor.
Well, thank you. And I agree. But I am so proud to be here in Utah, and I'm so proud of all the wonderful accomplishments of our state. There's so much that we have to be excited about our future. But we also have to recognize that despite our many successes, we do have areas of improvement where we need to make progress. We still haven't talked about the lowest per pupil funding in America in our public school system. We haven't talked about the largest gender wage gap in America for our women workers who aren't being paid adequately. And we also have one of the highest depression and teen suicide rates in America as well. All challenges that need to be addressed that we haven't had time to talk about today. And I get that we want to have a legitimate discourse. I believe, respectful discourse. I believe in that too, but we've also got to confront the things where we're not getting the job done. And I'm excited to work together in partnership. I think one way forward is for us to forge a new bipartisanship. And part of what that means is having some bipartisanship and letting others have a seat at the table and leading the state forward to a bright and optimistic future.
Thank you. For those in the hall, can you give a round of applause, please, to our two candidates?